The universe is an endless mystery. It is vast, unfathomable, and dark. Our lives exist in this brief moment of living. Our life is comprised of eating, drinking, moving, making noises, attaching ourselves to people and objects. We live on the same plane of existence as animals who also carry out those actions. So, why are humans always unhappy? It seems like we are constantly unimpressed and unfulfilled with the world around us. Yet, animals can live their lives almost carefree. Let's just say that the main source of a human's unhappiness is that they have the desire to ask why. This three-letter question is what separates us from the animals and even the great apes who tend to ask how. How can I get the food? How can I make a safe place to sleep? As far as we know, animals lack the ability to think beyond their survival needs and question motives by asking why. What's the ultimate goal? What's the meaning of all of this? In this video, we are going to explore the philosophy of nihilism, which inevitably features Friedrich Nietzsche. He has provided us with such famous quotes as, "The secret for harvesting from existence the greatest fruitfulness and the greatest enjoyment is to live dangerously," and "When you gaze long into the abyss also gazes into you." However, he also had some extremely profound thoughts such as, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster." Let's take a look at nihilism and find out more about this very interesting concept. Is man merely a mistake of gods, or God merely a mistake of man? Being able to ask why will not always get you the end result you're hoping for. Think about a 3-year-old who's been told that he can't have another cookie because the packet is empty. He will stand there and whine, why, but why? The fact of the matter is, the packet is still empty and he will not get a different answer by asking. But yet, he still asks the question with a grain of hope that a cookie will magically appear. Humans can't help but ask why. It's a drive within them. Major religions were developed by humans to answer this drive to understand the universe. Pre-history, people were living in harmony with nature and they didn't have the time to ask why. This was a luxury. They only had time in the day to survive. However, as they evolved and began creating more time for themselves by storing food, farming food, and making safer communities to live in, this extra time allowed their brains to consider the bigger picture, the why. By the time we come to written history and more recognisable humanity, we had been able to create complex and illogical reasons as to why the sun rose and set every day. The general population could be kept calm and mostly obedient by following the rules of religion with unwavering faith. However, by the Age of Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th centuries, science was offering evidence of other reasons to some previously unexplainable events. Society began to think more critically for themselves and question the old ways of thinking. This paradigm shift was not as simple as exchanging religion for science. With people looking for answers on a daily basis, torn between the two major options, a void was left. If we take Christianity in general as the religion of the Western world, when a person no longer follows the rules of being a Christian, they weren't scared of going to hell if they committed a sin, they didn't believe there was an afterlife in heaven, and then science offered them logical black and white answers to a physical problem, what happened to their spirituality, the concepts and questions held there? The exact definition of nihilism is the rejection of all religious and moral principles in the belief that life is meaningless. It also ties in with historic events in the early 1900s, where history defines it as the doctrine of an extreme Russian Revolutionary Party which found nothing to approve of in the established social order. So, what did Nietzsche observe as he began studying life and philosophy in Germany in the late 1800s? Dying at the age of 55, he provided a detailed diagnosis of nihilism as a widespread phenomenon of Western culture. The findings from Nietzsche's work point to a condition of tension as a disproportion between what we want to value or need and how the world appears to operate. Nihilism appears at that point not that displeasure of existence has become greater than before, but because one has come to mistrust any meaning in suffering, indeed in existence. It now seems as if there is no meaning at all in existence, as if everything were in vain. There are more than 5 specific forms of nihilism that are described by academics. Of course, this would take a whole video in itself to explore, and so in this one, we are going to discuss the general aspects and morality of nihilism as a concept. Once you have an understanding of this, you are then able to take a deep dive on other forms of nihilism, such as political, ethical, and so on. Reflecting on the predicament of forever asking why, there is a very human dilemma that you experience when you deny religion or spirituality and believe entirely in nothingness, simply logic. You will make the realization that life is meaningless, pointless, we merely exist. Yet then, you are forced to suffer that truth which you have uncovered. You cannot stop at the moment of acknowledging the meaningless. Your brain automatically forces you to think of the consequences and wonder what that outcome then means. Touching on the subject of the meaning of life, many people start to push further into these big questions, and then, faced with the prospect of nihilism, they recoil and go back to the easy way of finding a faith or preferring to ignore them altogether. Choosing to ignore science, especially in the 21st century, requires a total leap of faith. You have to leap to the conclusion, ignoring all others, that the religious path you have chosen, the rules they ask you to believe, is the only way. Whether that's believing in a person who lives in the clouds and monitors your mistakes, or whether it's the collection of prophets sent down to earth to do God's will. You have to metaphorically blind yourself from seeing the nature of your faith as anything but the truth. Because, the moment the cracks and doubts start to show, you begin to contemplate nihilism. The issue with choosing to ignore the core religious groups and believe only in science is that you can also alienate yourself from mindfulness and spirituality. Believing in nothing also means that you do not consider there to be a worth or value in self-improvement or developing your inner peace, because what's the point if life has no meaning? If you already have an idea about what a nihilistic person believes in, we're sure it wasn't a positive set of views. This is because believing entirely in nothing is extreme, just as believing solely in one God to control you is also extreme. They are two sides of the same exploration of the meaning of life. Nihilism in the media is often portrayed as anarchic and chaotic. Think of concepts such as the movie The Purge, or even punk rock and other disruptive elements, where people act in any way they please because they do not believe in society, consequences, or a long-term goal. They live in the present, and when there's nothing left to live for, who cares if you fuck shit up? People who take on the stance of becoming a nihilist permanently, meaning that it's not just an exploratory phase, can risk loneliness, depression, and other negative mental mindsets. They have no support structure, and they cannot find satisfaction in the same things as others. The nihilist stands alone, staring into that abyss. They know that there is no meaning to life, yet their brain continues to force them to consider the alternative. People that follow nihilism are often looked upon as pessimistic melancholy, and miserable. The social, community-driven world of the 18th century viewed these people as abnormal, but 200 years later, we are living in the West in what many consider to be the post-Christian society that Nietzsche already predicted. We find less community ideals, more isolation, and people who are expressing negative emotions on a regular basis. This is not unusual. It is no longer the odd one out, the odd one or two people who constantly see the bad in situations. In fact, it's now more of a rarity to meet a person who is bubbly and happy the majority of the time. This is a massive generalisation, but you get the picture. Being presented with a scientific and incontrovertible truth can be a hard pill to swallow. If we look at the famous saying by the character Sherlock Holmes, "How often have I said to you that when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth?" Now, the character of Sherlock is not a nihilist per se, but he does demonstrate reckless behaviour, drug-taking, and he treats the world as being a game or a puzzle for him to solve, without any added meaning such as a god to adhere to, or even a moral code. Looking deeper at the subject of moral nihilism, we get ourselves into some very murky waters. You see, if we take the positive, altruistic quality of generosity, this encompasses sharing, giving to make someone else feel happy, seeing an end goal of joy. In a nihilistic world, there is no governing law of morality or social structure because nothing matters. Therefore, the opposite of generosity, greed, has an equal footing. The nihilistic person doesn't believe in an afterlife where they are rewarded for being good. They also don't believe that life has any meaning, so whatever they do right now doesn't matter. They just live in the moment. Can you see the danger in that way of thinking? Crime, fraud, substance abuse, gratification, sensory satisfaction, depravity. These things would not matter to a true nihilist because they believe nothing matters, even their own existence. However, this leads to the rest of society placing meaning on their actions, such as locking them away in prisons, retaliating with violence, and even the potential death sentence that can come from either state law, suicide, or accidental death through the person's own actions. But Friedrich Nietzsche's teaching and musing on nihilism was not all negative or destructive. I was in darkness, but I took 3 steps and found myself in paradise. The first step was a good thought, the second a good word, and the third a good deed. He also tells us, the best friend will probably acquire the best wife, because a good marriage is founded on the talent for friendship. And everything good, fine or great men do is the first of all an argument against a skeptic inside of them. This glimpse into his other work and writings shows us that even though he is often hailed as the father of nihilism, along with Kierkegaard and Jacobi, who actually coined the term nihilism, he has not fully succumbed to the idea that life is completely meaningless. If he had, there would be no mention of friendship or coming out of the darkness, which we can interpret as a depressive episode. By now, you're probably thinking that nihilism and the associated extreme thought process has only negative things to offer us. Well, there are actually times when a nihilistic view can temporarily help you get through certain situations in your life. The first example is when you are trying to overcome a particular problem to which you see no solution. We could be literal with this and say that it's a mathematics problem and you are working on it, but really this could be anything. Maybe you're trying to decide what job you'd like or whether you should move house, maybe whether you should have kids or if you're trying to resolve a massive amount of debt. Anything which is a big issue to you that you have not managed to find the answer to. Sometimes you are too involved in the problem. You need to say fuck it and walk away for a short while. What if you looked at this in a nihilistic way and thought, there's no meaning to anything, I'll just do whatever? the first thing that springs to your mind is your gut instinct. Maybe it's something you'd previously written off due to the pressure of society. By freeing yourself and changing your mindset for that period of time, you allow yourself more opportunities to find more answers, different answers. Because if nothing matters, then why does this? It's a sad fact of life, especially after the pandemic, that however healthy you think you are, something terrible could be just around the corner. Dealing with the sadness of a terminally sick friend or relative can be soul-destroying. You will do the human thing of asking why. Why them? What have they done to deserve this? Why have you been punished? You're losing a person that you love far too soon when they're still so young. At these sad times, it can be helpful to ponder nihilism and release your anger and the feelings that things are unfair. If there is no God and no meaning to life, this was just a lottery, a genetic game of Russian roulette, a set of circumstances that could have happened to anyone no matter what. If you can get past wanting to find a meaning, it relieves the pressure on you, and you can begin to help your loved one through their last days with kindness, and maybe even get to a point where they can enjoy themselves before saying goodbye. Literal battles, and ones fought within families and societies, are terrible. If you find yourself in a long, drawn-out, difficult situation, it could be that it's because none of the participants feel that they're able to just put an end to it. We do not advocate violence, but an example of this is throwing a punch at someone. Imagine if you were in a situation where there is name-calling, threats, toxic behaviour. When someone gets to the point of not caring about anything, not caring about the consequences, they will throw that punch. There may even be a full-on fight, but action was taken, and it's often over in seconds. Looking at that moment that the action came, when the person was pushed to the point of breaking free of their traditional, usual moral code, this kind of nihilistic reaction can be applied without the violence. If we substitute the word violence for the broad term action, we can say that long-term conflicts and disagreements can be ended or even shortened by simply not caring, which then forces the action of a resolution.